Whenever a disaster strikes, our first thought is always, what happened? But have you ever stopped to think about how we actually know what happened? How does a story born from total chaos and tragedy actually make it through the centuries to us today? Well, the story of any disaster is built in layers, and it all starts with what we might call the very first draft. Take a look at this sentence. It was written almost 2,000 years ago, and it's one of the most important first drafts in history. A young man named Pliny the Younger wrote this in a letter to a historian, and that cloud he's talking about? That was the plume of smoke and ash rising from Mount Vesuvius, right at the start of the eruption that would literally bury the city of Pompeii. See, this isn't a textbook. It's a personal, in-the-moment observation. It's the beginning of an eyewitness account that has shaped everything we know about that fateful day. And that, right there, is where every story of a disaster really begins, with the human experience. Long before you get official reports or any kind of analysis, you just have the raw, unfiltered, and, let's be honest, often terrified perspectives of the people who actually lived through it. This is history at its most immediate and personal. What's so interesting is the kinds of details these eyewitnesses capture. For Pliny, watching Vesuvius from a safe distance, the sight was almost scientific. He very calmly described the cloud's shape, noting how it looked like a pine tree. But okay, let's fast forward almost 1,600 years to the Great Fire of London in 1666. The accounts from that event? Pure ground-level terror. The first draft there isn't about majestic clouds. It's about the feeling of running for your life through narrow streets choking with smoke and panic. And this is where you find these amazing, totally human details that you just can't get anywhere else. One of the most famous diaries from the London fire was kept by a man named Samuel Pepys. And in the middle of this citywide inferno, what's he worried about? He digs a hole in his garden to bury his most valuable possessions, his wine and, get this, a very large Parmesan cheese. It's such a small, almost funny detail, but it just makes the history feel so incredibly real. So, after the smoke literally and figuratively clears, and all these personal stories start to come out, the next chapter begins. This is the official search for answers. It's society's attempt to bring some order to the chaos, to take all those individual experiences and try to build a single, clear narrative to figure out, okay, what went wrong and who, if anyone, is to blame. More than 80. That's how many witnesses were called to testify before a U.S. Senate subcommittee investigating the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. The inquiry started just 4 days after the ship went down. They moved fast, calling everyone from the chairman of the shipping line all the way down to the lookout who first screamed, "Iceberg, right ahead." They wanted to get their stories on the record before everyone scattered. And the findings? Wow, they were sharp and they were damning. Just look at the language here. We're not talking about cheese or pine trees anymore. Now we have phrases like indifference to danger, absolute unpreparedness, and laxity of regulation. This is that big shift from the emotional, personal story of the eyewitness to the cold, analytical language of an investigation. The goal here is to find fault and assign responsibility, methodically. But, this formal process isn't just about pointing fingers. It's really about society trying to create an authoritative, definitive story. The whole point is to take thousands of chaotic, conflicting moments and forge them into one single lesson. A lesson that, hopefully, can help prevent the next disaster. And that leads us right into our next section, the tangible legacy. Because once the stories are told and the investigations are over, the really important question is, so what? How do these narratives actually change the world in ways that we can physically see and touch? The Great Fire of London is the perfect case study for this. All of those terrifying eyewitness accounts just confirmed what was obvious in retrospect. The city had fatal design flaws. You had wooden houses packed together on these tiny, narrow streets. London wasn't just a city, it was a tinderbox just waiting for a spark. And the response was incredibly direct. Check out this plan from King Charles II, issued right after the fire. He said streets must be wider to stop flames from jumping.
Houses must be rebuilt with brick or stone, not wood. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a royal command. You can draw a straight line from the story of the disaster to the physical rebuilding of the city. London literally rose from the ashes with a new, much safer blueprint.
That right there, that's legacy. And it's not always about buildings. The legacy of the Titanic wasn't a new city, it was new laws. Before the Titanic, it was totally legal to have lifeboats for only a fraction of the people on your ship. After the inquiry, that changed forever. International law was rewritten to require lifeboats for everyone. And crucially, ships were now required to have someone monitoring the radio 24/7, so a distress call would never ever go unheard again.
But this story doesn't just stop there, does it? These original accounts, the letters, the diaries, the official reports, they're just the beginning. History isn't some static thing in a book. These stories are constantly being filtered, retold, and repackaged for modern audiences, often with completely new goals in mind. So let's look at a really fascinating modern example. There's a podcast out there called History Speaks English. Its goal isn't to investigate a disaster or to change laws. Its goal is to teach English. It takes these epic historical events and breaks them down into useful vocabulary and common expressions. The Great Fire of London becomes a lesson on words like inferno and the idiom rise from the ashes. The Titanic isn't just a tragedy about an iceberg, it's a lesson on the meaning of a word like hubris and the expression sink or swim. And what this really shows us is that every retelling is a choice. The person making that podcast isn't really interested in the nitty-gritty of British Board of Trade regulations from 1912. They're focused on the powerful emotional moments and the clear vocabulary that will stick with someone learning a new language. The purpose of the telling literally shapes the story itself. It proves there's no single true version of history, just different interpretations for different reasons. Which brings us to a final, really crucial question for our own time. We've seen how history was recorded with pen and paper, diary entries, and official transcripts. But what about today? In our age of social media, deep fakes, and just a constant flood of digital information, what will our first draft of disaster even look like? And how will anyone in the future ever be able to sort through all that noise to figure out what really happened?